Now we're going to move on to Bill McCoshen. If you've been to a TDA event before, you may have seen Bill. We ask him quite often because he gives a great presentation. So, Bill, I am delighted to have you joining us today.
Debbie, thank you for having me. And before we get started, I want to congratulate TDA. First, Debbie Jackson and the staff at TDA, the slim staff, but the membership, because as Governor Evers said at the beginning of this conference today, I mean, we got the first real new money in the transportation fund in more than a decade. And that's because of the strategic work that TDA did and the persistence to get it done. It didn't happen overnight. It took multiple sessions, but it was worth it. And without your efforts as an organization and individually, I'm not sure that would have happened. So congratulations on a job well done. And the job's certainly not done overall. And we're going to talk about that over the next 15 minutes or so. I'm going to walk you through the election, what happened, what it likely means, not only for transportation, but other issues as we move forward. And let's get started. We'll go with the presidential election first. There's a lot of meat here, and some of the things I'm going to cover today aren't actually in the slides, but they're very relevant, particularly if you live in Southeast Wisconsin, to help you understand what happened. But you can see that Wisconsin had the largest turnout percentage-wise ever. 74% of voters turned out, spectacular turnout, 3.3 million people. I frankly thought the upper end would be 3.2 million. We exceeded that. If you look at the actual votes, it's razor thin. It's within 20,500 votes with Biden at 1,630,000. That's the second most in history. You can see Trump is the fourth highest turnout in history at 1.61. The only two that exceeded either Biden and or Trump in both cases were Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012. As Charles Franklin said, and by the way, I consider Charles a friend. He and I are going to disagree on some things over the course of my presentation, but he tries to get it right. And I admire and respect his work, and there will be times where we'll disagree on some things, and I think he expects that, and I expect that. So he's right. 3 out of our last 5 elections here in the state of Wisconsin for president of the United States have been decided by razor-thin margins. The only 2 that weren't close were, frankly, the Barack Obama races. In 2008, he blew up the numbers, which gave Democrats, you might remember, full control of the legislature for the first time in a generation in 2009 and 2010. But other than that, we are typically fairly razor close here in the state of Wisconsin. We won't spend a whole bunch of time on these maps other than to point out a couple things. The only 2 counties that flipped from red to blue this time around were Sauk County, which is a bellwether, and Door County. And frankly, those, I would say, suffered from a little bit of Trump fatigue. Let me give you an example. In Door County, Donald Trump got 48.5% of the vote, or 9,752. Mike Gallagher, the Republican congressional candidate, got 56.2% of the vote in Door County. And Joel Kitchens, the incumbent Republican state assemblyman, got 55.8. So it wasn't that Door County rejected Republicans. In fact, down ticket, they embraced them by large majorities. But there was some Trump fatigue in those 2 counties. But other than that, Trump won 58 counties. I think this is sort of the untold story. There's 2 parts of this race that really could have changed the outcome. This is the smaller piece. This is the narrower path. But it's important for folks from Southeast Wisconsin or political junkies in particular to understand that Donald Trump actually, he spiked the vote everywhere. He got 205,000 more votes this time than he did 4 years ago. That's an extraordinary increase in turnout, okay? But in the key counties in Southeast Wisconsin, he actually did slightly worse than the GOP candidate for Congress. Let's walk through them. In Washington County, the Fitzgerald got 1,800 more votes. Ozaukee County, Grothman got 2,300 more votes. Waukesha County, frankly, is mostly Scott Fitzgerald, but a little bit of Brian Stile combined. They got almost 8,000 more votes than Trump. Milwaukee County, that is partially in Fitzgerald or Grossman's seat, 3,300 votes. Racine County is Style, 4,800. Kenosha County, 3,500. If you add those up, if Donald Trump just performs at the same level that the GOP congressional candidates did, he wins. Okay? But that's a very narrow path, and I'm going to show you why. After Dane and Milwaukee County, Donald Trump was down by 364,000 votes. These are the largest spreads in history in the state of Wisconsin. Republicans are going to struggle to win statewide for the foreseeable future unless and until they address these problems. You can't lose counties by this number. Democrats have done an extraordinary job of turning out the vote in both of these counties over the course of time, but this cycle in particular, it was literally off the charts. And that's a 364,000 vote deficit after 2 out of 72 counties is turned out to be insurmountable. I would argue this is the biggest reason Donald Trump has not carried the state. The other, Waukesha or Southeast Wisconsin, was a narrow path for him to get there, even notwithstanding these numbers in Dane County. But Republicans are going to have to do a better job statewide if they want to continue to win. Let's take a look at where some of the new votes came from. For Trump, he turned out 17,000 more new votes in Waukesha County. He also turned out 9,000 more new votes in Kenosha. I mean, you can look at these numbers for yourself. In his top 10 counties, he produced 87,000 more votes than he did 4 years ago. That's extraordinary. And the folks working on the front lines in those counties are to be commended for that kind of turnout. But if you look at Biden versus Clinton, the first two are not surprising, right? Dane County produced 42,460 more votes. Milwaukee County, 28,500 roughly. But the third one is probably the surprise. In Waukesha County, Biden was able to generate 24,600 more votes than Hillary Clinton did. So let's do the math on this. And I know Walbeck is based in Waukesha County. There were 41,733 new voters in Waukesha County total this year between 2016 and 2020. 59% of those went to Joe Biden. That's almost unheard of. Again, I don't believe Southeast Wisconsin is the reason Donald Trump lost. I would argue he actually overperformed. There's no question about that than his numbers from 2016. But it would have provided a narrow path for him to win, notwithstanding Dane and Milwaukee counties. We only had one competitive race, and pretty much all the politicos in Wisconsin knew which one that would be, and that was the 3rd district. Part of the reason for that is Donald Trump won the 3rd district back in 2016. He did not win it this time. Derek Van Orden, former Navy SEAL, was the candidate. He gave Ron Kine the closest race he's had since he beat Jim Hartsdorf back in the 90s. I think Brian Fraley may have been part of that race back then. But it was a razor-thin win for Kine. And as you can see, every other congressman, regardless of party, was elected by 59% or more. So there weren't any close races other than the 3rd. Control of the legislature. This is where, literally, no pun intended, the rubber meets the road for us on the transportation issues. There are 24 newly elected lawmakers. 4 incumbents were defeated, 3 on election day and 1 in the primary. You can see that the turnover overall is not historic like it was in 2010 or 2014 or even 2012 for that matter, but it is fairly significant. There'll be a lot of new faces. There's 132 lawmakers total. 24 of those are going to be brand new this time. Republicans will have a 61-38 majority. This is something I would say Robin Vos overperformed. Expectations were that the Republicans would lose anywhere from 4 to 7 seats, primarily in the suburbs of Milwaukee. I would argue that because Trump turned out so many more voters this time around, he actually helped keep that number to just 2 seats. They lost the Ozaukee County seat with Jim Ott, and they lost one that's primarily based out of the Wauwatosa area with Rob Hutton. Both of those seats, or at least the Hutton one, does touch Milwaukee County. So not a big surprise, but I would say on election night, Robin Vos was actually one of the winners, even though he lost 2 seats, because his majority is still overwhelming. It may not be a super majority, but it's overwhelming. I'm not going to go through each seat, but I want you to see where the targets were. The blue targets were where Vos tried to flip seats. Most of those were in my home area of northern Wisconsin. The Republicans like to call these the bad counties, Bayfield, Ashland, Douglas. Having grown up there, I don't like to refer to them as bad. I think they're good counties. That Republicans just haven't done a very good job communicating with those folks. The theory was Trump is so popular in the 7th CD and he's so popular in the Duluth congressional district that he would create a air cover for these Republicans to do well. Democrats raised a ton of money to protect these seats. Nick Milroy in the 73rd, which is Superior and Douglas County, my hometown, only was decided by 138 votes out of 33,000 cast. The only other changes, again, were in southeast Wisconsin. I think probably the biggest surprise on election night as far as saves go would be the 51st in Todd Novak. Todd Novak does touch Dane County. He's got Iowa County, Sauk County as well. Novak overperformed the President of the United States by 10 points. That's pretty spectacular. Give you an idea of the competitiveness. Some of these seats weren't as competitive as folks had expected them to be, but it's, it varies from seat to seat. Some were more competitive. The 73rd, the blue one, was 0.4. That was a target of Robin Vos's, just missed. I don't believe they're going to file for a recount, but I would imagine that Keith Kern, the Republican candidate, will run again in 2 years. He's a city council member from Superior. I mean, that is a razor-thin victory for sure. The closest races, again, the Milroy race, Dan Knodel to the right of him was 3%. Ken Skoronsky to the right of him was 4%. Novak won by 4, which is, I would consider that a landslide. I think Brian Fraley would as well, to get 4% victory in that seat. So you can see that there were close races, but Republicans were able to hold serve in most of them except for 2, and Democrats held serve on all their targets. The spending is a story in this election that really doesn't get much attention, but Democrats actually outspent Republicans. Let me repeat that. Democrats actually outspent Republicans in all the key legislative seats this year and overall. Democratic Party of Wisconsin raised more than $25 million this time. Remember, they're the minority party. That's a spectacular amount of money for a minority party to raise. Yet they were able to do it, and they made seats competitive, and they kept people home, like Speaker Robin Vos. There was nearly $1 million of spending against him, even though he's got a fairly safe seat in the last 3 weeks, that kept Robin Vos home. No question about that. If you look at the total spending, Democrats outspent Republicans in assembly seats by roughly $2 million. Again, extraordinary considering the level of majority that Robin Vos and his speakership has. The reason for this, to be very clear, Democrats were trying to protect Governor Evers' vetoes, both in the Assembly and in the Senate. We'll talk about the Senate in just a second. Robin Vos was at 63 seats going into the election. To get to 66 in order to get a veto-proof majority. Clearly, he didn't get there. Frankly, not many people ever thought he could get there. State Senate. Not everybody predicted this. I'll knock on wood. I was one of them that thought that the Republicans could get to 21. I didn't think they could get to 22 seats. So they are one shy of a veto-proof majority. But this is, as you can tell, it's actually their largest majority since the late 50s, early 60s, before I was born. Couple of flips. Rob Staffsholt in the upper left-hand corner, the 10th Senate District. This used to be Sheila Harsdorf's district. It became an open seat when she joined the Walker administration. Patty Schochner won it. It is a Republican seat on the numbers. Everyone expected Staffsholt to win, and he won convincingly, and I'll show you that in a second. Eric Wimberger, this is another takeaway for Republicans in the 30th. This was Dave Hansen's seat. This seat has not been Republican since Gary Drizwicki. And for the folks with gray hair in the room, or watching it in your office, you might remember Gary Drzwicki, but he was in the legislature in the 90s. It's been a long time since this seat was Republican. Eric Wimberger, local attorney, ran 4 years ago, came close but didn't win. This time he did. The closest race, and the one that would have gotten Republicans to 22, is the 32nd. This is Jen Schilling's old seat. It was a rematch between Dan Kapanke and Brad Pfaff. They ran against each other in 2004. I want to be clear, the lines of that seat were different back in 2004 than they are today. It's a slightly more Democratic seat than it was back then, but Kapanke won that race 52-48. Fast forward 16 years, it's a rematch. Pfaff had served briefly as the interim or acting Secretary of Ag before he was rejected by the state Senate. This race had an extraordinary amount of spending, which we'll talk about in just a second, but Pfaff ended up winning by about 500 votes. Everyone else, Alberta Darling, folks in Madison thought she was in trouble. She won easily, 8.6%. Wimberger, I think, is the biggest surprise of the group in that Democrats had hoped this would be close. They thought they could keep this seat. It wasn't close at all. And then the other would be Pat Teston in the 24th. On the numbers, this is a 50-50 seat at best, if not slightly more Democratic, maybe 51%. Pat Teston easily won that. And then I think the other noteworthy thing, there's two other noteworthy pieces. Julian Bradley becomes the first Black GOP senator in Wisconsin history. That's a good thing. No question about that. He'll represent Dave Craig's old seat in the Waukesha area. And then Mary Felaskowski literally blew the doors off the 12th district. This is Trump country. If you've been up in Lincoln, Oneida County, and Vilas County, you know this is Trump country, and this was not even close. She won by almost 33%. Give you an idea on the spending. Democrats outspent Alberta Darling. She's the 8th district. Republicans outspent Democrats in the 10th. This was never discussed really publicly, but Democrats pulled out of the 10th quite a bit earlier than probably Patty Shockner would have preferred. In the 24th, which is Teston, Republicans did outspend Democrats, but frankly, I credit Pat Teston's 13-point win to his hard work. The guy did 18,000 doors in the last 3 months, and he just works and works and works. And in politics, retail and knocking on doors makes a huge difference, often more so than money. In the 30th, which is Green Bay, Democrats clearly outspent Republicans. And in the 32nd, frankly, this was the seat that Democrats were going to go all in to try and preserve the veto. Had Republicans won this, they would have had a veto-proof majority in the Senate. Democrats outspent Republicans at least 2-1 on the money we can track, and Brad Pfaff narrowly won that race. Overall, the spending was fairly close, but as you can see, same as the Assembly, Democrats outspent Republicans in this cycle. Give you an idea of the leadership. Governor Evers was on at the kick this thing off. Robin Voss will remain in place. The one new face, as you can see, is Devin LeMahieu. Devin is from the Sheboygan area. He's quiet, steady. You'll see a different style from him than you might have seen from Scott Fitzgerald. He's reshaping committees, including the Finance Committee. We know yesterday he appointed Howard Markline to be the co-chair of the Finance Committee, replacing Alberta Darling. Frankly, that could be good news for transportation in that we know Howard Markline 2 years ago, was the only Republican to run ads about fixing the roads. And he's a big supporter of fixing local and county roads. So, I think that's a hopeful thing for transportation supporters that Howard's in the position he's in. So here's where we're at on the legislative horizon. There's a possibility that the Senate could return to finish their calendar. Remember, when COVID hit, the Senate still had 140 bills on their March 24th calendar that never were acted on. I don't believe the Senate's going to come back to finish those items. And, Eric Peterson and I have multiple items on that list, so I feel bad about that. But I don't think they're going to do that. If they come back, the Senate, on anything, it would be on gubernatorial appointments. And I would not be surprised if Secretary of Health Andrea Palm faced the same outcome that Brad Pfaff did and gets rejected. That's still a possibility before the end of the year, unless there's some grand bargain on COVID between the governor and the legislative leaders. So we'll see. The executive budget, the governor will focus on COVID, I would imagine. He will focus on schools. He will absolutely support Medicaid expansion again. There's no question about that. His budget should be introduced on time. I think we all should be hopeful that he will continue to invest in transportation. You might remember last summer when he signed the budget, much to the surprise of a lot of Democrats, because no Democrat voted for it, he said it was a down payment. So let's take him at his word and hope for good things when the budget's released as it relates to transportation. Legislative outlook, listen, there's a lot for Republicans to feel pretty good about. They picked up 2 seats in the state Senate. They only lost 2 seats in the state assembly, but they have overwhelming majorities in both houses. So they don't have to necessarily toe the line on items that Governor Evers introduces. In fact, they could ignore it. And if I had to predict, that's what they will do in most cases. Our hope is that transportation can be one of those bipartisan items, as it was in the last biennial budget when Evers and Fitzgerald and Voss found some middle ground to get a package through the legislature. So I cut it down. The slide deck that TDA has is a little bit longer than this, and it gives you more in-depth, but to give you sort of a flavor of where things are at, both sides can claim some victories here. I think democracy gets the first victory, and that 3.3 million people voted here. That's extraordinary. And something we should all celebrate. So people's voices were heard. Half the state might not like the outcome at this point in time, which maybe will force some compromises in the legislative process over the next session. So Debbie, I'm happy to take any questions.
Absolutely. We do have some questions from the participants, and I want to be perfectly clear. I am not creating a rift between you and Professor Franklin, but as a long-term user of polls, I want to understand what your thought process is. You use them for candidates, use them for public policy issues. What is the impact as far as the significant misses in our recent polling data?
So a couple of things for all your audience today, Debbie, to think about. The Trump internal polls were spot on. He had himself down 1 point heading into the final weekend. The only public polling firm that came close would be the Trafalgar Group. They had Biden +1 with 4 days left in the election. That's like hitting the bullseye in polling. Remember, this election was decided by 0.6. Trafalgar had it at 0.1, and the Trump internals had it at 1%. So I think there's a distinction I'm trying to draw here between public polling and private polling.
Right.
If you work for a candidate, you have to get it right. Your models have to be right, or you're never working this business again. On the external side, I would argue you either don't know what you're doing, you have to try and get it that wrong. I mean, for the ABC Washington Post poll to have Biden +17 6 days out when the race was decided by 0.6, I mean, you're 4 times outside the margin of error. I mean, you're incompetent. I mean, there's no other way to put it. New York Times Siena had Biden +11. Reuters Ipsos had Biden +10. And even UW-Madison, the Badger poll, had Biden +9. Those were all wildly wrong. Charles was better this time, and he and I have had this conversation already, as have I and Mike Boucher, who works with him on the Marquette Law School poll. He got the outcome right? So he picked Biden to win. But in public polling, the spread matters. People, if you want credibility, you got to be inside the margin of error. Charles was just outside the margin of error. He knows this. I got to see him on the Sunday shows this weekend explaining it. And I'm not trying to criticize him, but public polling suffered a major credibility hit this time around. No question about that.
Another question. Participant wants to know, does the vote indicate that people were splitting their vote in order to keep a balance between the executive and the congressional at the federal level?
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, Wisconsin has a proud history of ticket splitting, and people don't mind split government. They like checks and balances. So while they may have voted for Biden at the top of the ticket, particularly in southeast Wisconsin, in some cases, not in all cases, they went for the Republican on the congressional side. And I think we all know Republicans are going to pick up anywhere between 9 and 12 seats in the House of Representatives. And I think they're going to keep both seats in Georgia, which will give them 52 seats in the United States Senate.
Well, I thank you very much. I actually like the information that both you and Charles brought. I am hoping that transportation is one of the bipartisan issues at both the state and federal level, that we can make progress in the next year. So thanks very much, Bill.
You guys are doing a great job. Take questions by email, bill@capitalconsultants.net. If we don't questions by email, bill@capitalconsultants.net.